hello, and welcome to Women Work Your Faith. My name is Sylvia Johnson, and today I am going to review the Sunday School Lesson for Sunday, April the 14th. So come on in, everyone. I'm looking here to see if the video is up. I don't see it yet, so I hope you all can see me. Here we go. All right. Welcome everyone to Women Work Your Faith. My name is Sylvia Johnson, and today I'm going to be reviewing the Sunday School Lesson for Sunday, April the 14th. The title for Sunday, April the 14th is An Eternal Kingdom. Our Bible basis is 2 Samuel, the 7th chapter, the 4th through the 16th verse, and they're doing the first half of the 16th verse. Our Bible truth, be sure your plans are from the Lord. Our memory verse, and thine house and thy kingdom shall be established forever before thee. From 2 Samuel 7 and 16, the King James Version. Our lesson aim. By the end of the lesson, we will recognize the significance of making God a major part of planning an inheritance for our descendants. We will feel the need to keep trusting God even when he denies our request and decide to seek God's heart and to be in his presence. So welcome. Thank you for joining me this week for Sunday school. I feel like I've been away forever, but I only skipped 1 week. But March was full of lots of activities and things. And so I took a break last week, and I'm happy to be coming back in on this lesson. This is a very, well, they're all good lessons. I say that every week. So we'll just get right to it. This lesson picks up, strangely so, after the resurrection of Jesus, we go back to the Old Testament. And so this lesson picks up after David has been installed as king of Israel, and he has brought in the Ark of the Covenant, and things seem to be sitting well with him, right? And the Bible tells us in 2 Samuel, the Lord gave him rest, meaning he had a time of peace. And during that time, he says to the prophet Nathan, I have all this. He's feeling blessed and highly favored. And he's like, I have all of this, but the Lord has, is in a tent. This doesn't seem right. And Nathan's like, do whatever is in your heart. God is with you. And so he gives him his blessing to do with whatever he's thinking to do. Well, that night, the Lord comes to Nathan and lets him know, wait a minute. Let's pause here. I got a message for David. And so David had gone to the man of God to get an answer, and the man of God gave an answer before he had the answer. And so what we find here is that there's something in David's heart to do, but we realize that everything in our heart is not of God. And it doesn't mean that we have this desire to do wicked, evil things. It's just that some things that come to us, some ambitions or desires that we have that seem good, are not in line with the will of God and what he wants to see done in our lives and in his kingdom. And so God, being God, comes to Nathan and straightens all this out. And so that's where our lesson picks up today. So starting in 2 Samuel, I'm gonna read from the Bible, not a Sunday school book. Starting in 2 Samuel, the 7th chapter, and in the 4th verse, it says, And it came to pass that night that the word of the Lord came unto Nathan, saying, Go and tell my servant David, Thus saith the Lord, Shalt thou build me a house for me to dwell in? And here we are. Like I said, the Lord comes to Nathan that night and brings a word. And he tells Nathan to go to his servant David and ask him what the Lord often does. He presents a rhetorical question. And in this question, well, any question, when God asks you a question, first, it's not because he doesn't know the answer. He knows the answer. You need to know the answer. And sometimes we think we know the answer. But if God asked you a question, the answer you think you know ain't the answer. Okay? You need to go back and think about it and find out what the real answer is. And so even though up until that point, we don't know what it was in David's heart to do. God knew what was in his heart. And so he tells Nathan, go to him and ask him, shalt thou build me a house for me to dwell in? So it's interesting because I wrote down a couple of things. He says, go to my servant and tell him, thus say the Lord. And so servant and Lord. And so you recognize in this moment who God sees David as and who God knows himself to be in David's life, right? So the word servant means like a bondsman or someone who belongs to you. And we tend to think of it as something that's demeaning or degrading, but to be a servant of God is a most honorable position. But he has bought us, right? He does own us. We do belong to him. And so he's telling Nathan to go to this person who belongs to me. And I am his Lord. Are you going to build me a house to dwell in? Let's think about this. Are you going to build your Lord a house to dwell in? And so he's going to straighten all of this out. And he's asking in a way where you look at yourself and you re-examine your position and your thinking. Because like I said, everything in our heart is not of God and it's not in his will. And so what seems good in a certain situation may not be good because it isn't what he desires. It's what we desire. And so God continues on, making sure I got all my notes. God continues on to say, whereas I have not dwelt in any house since the time that I brought up the children of Israel out of Egypt, even to this day, but have walked in a tent and in a tabernacle. In the 7th verse, he says, in all the places wherein I have walked with all the children of Israel, spake I a word with any of the tribes of Israel, whom I commanded to feed my people Israel, saying, why build ye not a house of cedar? And so God points out the history. God always takes us back. And I was thinking about that today. Sometimes we get annoyed when our parents are talking to us or somebody's talking to you and they're like, let's remember back when. And we're like, why we always got to go back here? Well, an important thing to remember about God is he can always go back in the history because from point A, he has always been working one plan. He has always been working to have his will be done in the earth. He has always been building his kingdom. So at no point in the journey, what God did was not according to the plan. And so he says, I have never been in a house. In all this time that I've been walking with your people, I have never been in a house. And since I brought you out of Egypt, and he says, even to this day, I've been in a tent and a tabernacle. And so if you go back to Exodus, when God gave Moses the directions for the tabernacle and the Ark of the Testimony, how it should be made, how it should be packed, how it should be carried, that was God's desire to do that. And, when you think about it, they had to pack all of those things, and especially the Ark of the Covenant had to be carried on poles, and the Levites had to carry it. And so God had set into place the way that he desired for it to be. And his dwelling place, his tabernacle, the place where he dwelt, was a tent. It was cloth that he had all of them sew together and put up. And so he's pointing out that in all this time that I could have designated for a home, a house, a structure house to be built, I instructed them to do this. And he said, with any of the tribes of Israel whom I commanded to feed my people. So all the people that he walked with, all the leaders that he told to be judges and elders over the people, he commanded them to feed his people. He never said, build me a house. And so what we often do, and that was a problem with the children of Israel. In fact, that's how they got to having a king in the first place, right? What they saw looked good. And so they asked for a leader or a ruler. Well, they specifically asked for a king like the other nations had, right? And so some of the things that we see before us look good. and what other people are doing look good. And we can get into the habit of comparing apples to oranges, right? What they're doing isn't what I'm becoming. But because what they're doing looks good, I try to conform and be like them. And so building a house, building a dwelling place, the way that cultures did at that time, a place of worship, seemed like the thing to do because, my God's great. Why should my God be in a tent and, not in a grand structure in a house where I can build too? Well, you start to then really, your ambition is twisted at that point. You start to look at, and we do it now, we build these great cathedrals and temples and churches and all this other stuff because we want our stuff to look good, but it's not what the building of the kingdom is about. And so God is pointing out here that he told his people, when he could have told them to build him a house, he told them to feed my people. And he's going to build on that. And so he wasn't stationary in any one house or building or structure. And it's very interesting because until David came into the picture, the children of Israel were kind of scattered and they did their own thing. He brought order and true governance to the kingdom. And he made the people a people, like one body. They were just lots of people scattered abroad and weren't all living faithfully and worshiping God as they should. But when David came into the picture, that's when they really became to be one people. And I said right here in my notes, I put their commandment was to feed these people. So God's desire was for these people to be one. So David was working in what God wanted done. And if we go on to the 8th verse, it says, now, therefore, so shalt thou say to my servant David, thus saith the Lord of hosts, I took thee from the sheepcote, from following the sheep to be ruler over my people, over Israel. And I was with thee whithersoever thou wentest, and have cut off all thine enemies out of thy sight, and have made thee a great name, like unto the name of the great men that are in the earth. And so he continues on and explains, tell David, I took him from the sheepcote. And if you want to go back to 1 Samuel, the 16th chapter, and we'll start at the 10th verse. Well, first we'll start at the first verse, and then we're going to skip to the 10th. And the 1 Samuel, the 16th chapter, the first verse, it says, and the Lord said unto Samuel, how long wilt thou mourn for Saul, seeing I have rejected him from reigning over Israel? Fill thine horn with oil, and go. I will send thee to Jesse the Bethlehemite, for I have provided me a king among his sons. Going to the 10th verse. Again, Jesse made 7 of his sons to pass before Samuel. And Samuel said unto Jesse, the Lord hath not chosen these. And Samuel said unto Jesse, are here all thy children? And he said, there remaineth yet the youngest, and behold, he keepeth the sheep. And Samuel said unto Jesse, send and fetch him, for we will not sit down till he come hither. And he sent and brought him in. Now he was ruddy and withal of a beautiful countenance, and goodly to look to. And the Lord said, arise, anoint him, for this is he. So this part picks up after God has stripped the kingdom away from Saul, not physically, but in God's sight, Saul is no longer pleasant before him. And he tells Samuel to go and anoint a king of his choosing. And this king at the time was the youngest of Jesse's sons. Well, he's still the youngest of his sons, David. And at that time, he was a shepherd. He was out with the sheep. And so Jesse had made from the oldest down come and present himself to Samuel. And each one, Samuel was like, yeah. And God was like, no. And Samuel was like, yeah. And God was like, no. Stop looking at what you see on the outside. I judge the heart. Keep going. And so after all of the sons had come before Samuel, he was like, God's not selecting any of these. Do you have any more children? And then that's when David is brought in, and he's brought in from tending the sheep. And so David, being the youngest, would have been considered the lowest. And he was in a position where he was out, in the field and dirty and working with the animals. And so if you come back to the lesson, God says, I took you from there. Okay. And he says, in the 8th verse, it says, I took thee from the sheepcote, from following the sheep, to be ruler over my people. So I moved you from this position of tending to animals out in the field and dirty to rule over the people. And to rule, he's saying, to be at the head of, to stand boldly before, to command and have chief status and authority over these people. So I took someone who protected and nurtured and cared for the sheep and put them in a position to care for his people, God's people. And not only did God move him in status, right? He stayed with him and gave him peace and brought him out from under the hand of any enemy. He prospered him wherever he went, right? And even though when we read David's history, he had some tumultuous times, and he made some mistakes for sure. But in every situation, God delivered him. And so God is presenting this image to David to say, I'm capable of doing any and everything that needs to be done. I'm capable of commanding any and everyone and doing whatever it is I want done. I did everything that you've seen happen in your life. That was me. And so what God is really doing in the godly way that he does is he's putting David in his place, but he's also getting ready to bless him. And the truth is, we are most blessed when we realize who we are and who he is to us. And sometimes we get in a position where we think we're going to do more for God, and God has to remind us that he does all, and all we need to do is worship him. So David here is thinking of building a house to house his God. And his God is like, calm down. I do everything I need done. And so if we continue on, let's see. I just want to make sure. Oh, something else I pointed here. It said he moved David from his dwelling to where he dwells. And so if you think about the irony in that, you're going to make a place for me to dwell, but where you dwell is solely because of me. And so God, like I said, that rhetorical question, he makes a question that has a very clear answer, and he paints the picture so clearly so that you come to the conclusion that he's bringing you to. And so David is in a position where he has to look at everything and see that was God. And so moving on, we're in 2 Samuel, the 7th chapter, the 10th verse. Moreover, I will appoint a place. Yes, he made him a great name. And it says, moreover, I will appoint a place for my people Israel, and I will plant them that they may dwell in a place of their own and move no more. Neither shall the children of wickedness afflict them anymore as before time, and as since the time that I commanded judges to be over my people Israel, and have caused thee to rest from all thine enemies. Also the Lord telleth thee that he will make thee a house. And so God is now revealing what his plan is. And so David, you thought you had a plan, but here's my plan. I'm going to make a dwelling place for all of my people, Israel. And I'm going to plant them there. And so when you plant something, your intention is for it to take root and to grow. And that's what God wants for his people. Where he puts us, his intention is for us to take root and to grow. And if you continue on in that analogy, we're supposed to produce fruit, right? And so he's saying that I'm going to put you somewhere and move you no more. And then you'll be protected. So not only am I going to give you a place you and all the people a place to dwell, but you're going to be productive there, and you're going to be protected there by God. And since the time, and he's comparing it, right? And it's not going to be like any time before. So when he brought them out of Egypt, they took on, well, they picked back up rather, because before they went into Egypt, they were nomads. And then when they came out of Egypt, they were kind of nomadic, right? They were going around for 40 years. And then, like I said, after they came over into the promised land, they kind of scattered. Each descendant or tribe had an inheritance, but there was no established place that made them one people. And so God is telling telling David through Nathan, that his intention is for it to be so, and that he's going to create a dwelling for his children. And so you find that God is working on building up this kingdom and where they will dwell. And it says at the end of that, also the Lord telleth thee that he will make thee a house. So he's going to build a house. So David thought in the beginning he was going to build a house, but God's got his own house in mind. And so the house concept is a structure, but it's also a lineage. And this is something that's kind of going to be, well, it is new to the children of Israel. And so in the 12th verse, it says, and when thy days be fulfilled, and thou shalt sleep with thy fathers, I will set up thy seed after thee, which shall proceed out of thy bowels, and I will establish his kingdom. He shall build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. This is new, because even going back to when God brought the children of Israel out of Egypt, the line of succession of leadership wasn't assigned to one family. So, you know, when Moses stayed behind after they crossed over to the promised land, you actually don't hear what happened to Moses' children. We assume since he was from the tribe of Levi that they're somewhere in the mix. But you don't know. And, you know, it goes to Joshua. And then after Joshua, you know, judges came up. And so there was no line of succession based on whose descendant they were. And when God appointed Saul as king, his children, his sons were killed. And his daughter, who was married to David, bore no children ever. When he removed Saul, he also removed his line. And so this concept that's not foreign in other places, but this concept of a line of succession through the line of David is new. And it's an honor that God would bestow that on him, to say that I'm going to use your son, and your son is going to build me a house. And it says, I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. And, you know, we're talking about God here. Forever is a long time. And so the fact that God would honor David, and if you read through the Bible, you see many times God goes back to this promise that he makes, really shows the significance of the relationship that he's establishing here. And so it says in the 14th verse, I will be his father, and he will be my son. If he commit iniquity, I will chasten him with the rod of men and with the stripes of the children of men. But my mercy shall not depart away from him, as I took it from Saul, whom I put away before thee. And God is continuing this promise. So he goes from the beginning of this lesson to, from the beginning as a rhetorical question, ponder this, to a reference in history, even going back here, this is how things were, and setting the context and the foundation, to speaking towards what his will is and his promises to David. And so I'm going to make a place for the people. They're going to be safe and protected there. And I'm going to establish you a house. And so the Davidic line starts here, and I will establish it. And through your son, he will build my house, my dwelling place. And that will take place after I've established the dwelling place of the people. And that line for the kingdom will be forever. And so it says, I won't take it away the way I did with Saul. Well, what happened with Saul? So if we go back to the first Samuel, before David was anointed as king, Saul was supposed to follow the instructions of the Lord, which he did not when he went into the city of Amalek. And Saul comes to a point where he's following after the people instead of following after God. And so in the 15th chapter of the first Samuel, in the 11th verse, God says, it repenteth me that I have set up Saul to be king, for he's turned back from following me, and hath not performed my commandments. And it grieved Samuel, and he cried unto the Lord all night. And so after that, Samuel goes to see Saul and finds out what he's done, tells him what God's decision is. And Samuel said, hath the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices, as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to hearken than the fat of rams. And so Saul was supposed to destroy everything, but he saw some good stuff and the people saw some good stuff. And so they brought it back with the intent of keeping some good stuff and sacrificing some good stuff to God. Like, I can appease God. Like, I didn't really do what you said, but look what I brought you. So if you take some of this, I think we'll be good, right? And what Samuel tells Saul is no deal. Whatever it is that you're going to bring before God, he would have rather had your obedience. And he continues on to the 23rd verse and says, for rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft, and stubbornness is as iniquity and idolatry. Because thou hast rejected the word of the Lord, he hath also rejected thee from being king. And so this analogy and comparison that he makes between the acts and the things that Saul has done. So let's see. Obedience is better than sacrifice. So when you make an offering to God, what he would rather have you offer up is your will, not your tangibles, right? And then he says, and to hearken than the fat of the rams. So what God would rather have is for you to listen and do. That's what it means to hearken, to hear and follow through with what was said. And then he would not, and he compares your rebellion to witchcraft. So when I rise up in my will against God, I'm the same as a witch, someone who is working in the spiritual realm and the magic and the trying to use the power of the spirits and God. I might as well be one of those. And it says stubbornness, iniquity, and idolatry. When I'm stubborn, I'm standing on what I think, and it is higher than my God. I am valuing it above my God. And so we don't think of it like that. It's like, I'm just doing what I think is good and what I think is right. But what God is saying is, what I want is your submission. I don't want your things, and I don't want your appeasements and things like that. And so he removes Saul as king. And so what we find is that God makes a promise in the lesson that he's not going to have this with David's son. He's saying, I will be with him forever. Now, if he disobeys me or if he does something, I will be like a father to him. I will chasten him. I'll correct him. And it says with the rod of men. So we find later that there are some wars and battles that take place in the Davidic line because they have not obeyed God. But it says, my mercy shall not depart away from him. And in one translation, it says my loving kindness. And think about it, that mercy, that goodness of God, where he does not, he does not treat us as our sins deserve. He doesn't retaliate and punish and hold against us the things that we've done. We don't instantly meet the consequences of our actions because God is patient with us and because he chooses to give us another chance. And so he promises that his mercy would not depart from this descendant. And it says, like he did from Saul. So he's not going to throw your son away. Now, and you see where God makes this promise, you kind of get the inkling that the son ain't going to always do right. But God's going to be patient with him, and he's going to have loving kindness towards him. He's not going to treat him like Saul and throw him away. And then it says in the 16th verse, and thine house and thy kingdom shall be established forever before thee. Your Sunday school book stops right here, but I'm just going to read the rest of it. Thy throne shall be established forever. And so we have David, who looks at a situation with his own eyes and sees what he thinks is good. He admits he tossed Saul to the side. No, what he's saying is that he put him away, and he's not going to do that in his next king, who's going to be David's son. So no, that's me using my analogy, right? But Saul was put away because of his behavior. Again, God understands the heart. And a lot of times we see something and we think, well, it wasn't that bad. But God understands the long-term ramifications of what's going to happen. And we see, if we go back and look at Saul, how he continued down the line of rebellion, how he continued and continued to move away from God, all the way up to the point in his last day of life where he goes and he sees and draws up witchcraft to pull up Samuel's ghost to consult him. And Samuel's like, what have you done? You know you're not supposed to do this. And he's like, just tell me what's going to happen. And he's like, hey, tomorrow you're going to be here with me. And so we see that Saul was not able to come back to God. He was going down the line of sin. And so what God is saying is that he will be merciful with David's son, and he won't allow that mercy to go away. He will stay with him. And it's a shadow, as Kanisha likes to say, the shadow of good things to come. And so God makes this promise of mercy and loving kindness. And it's like how he handles us. And if you think about what God is promising, everything that he does in the Old Testament is this shadow of good things to come. And so he's promising a place for his people. He's promising the building of a house for David, right? And we understand that the true fulfillment of the building of the house and the establishing of the kingdom forever and the safe and the protected place for all of his people comes through God's son, Jesus Christ. And so it goes all the way back to the point where David is trying to do something, but God is working a bigger plan. And so our little piece of something that we think we want to put in there is really nothing in comparison to what God is trying to do. And we need to be in line with him. And so God called David to be a shepherd. He was supposed to gather the flock and tend to God's people, which he does. But David had a thought to do something else. And what God says is, don't worry about that. I've got this. And here's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to do it through your line. And so we know that, and well, we might know, we might not. Solomon comes up next. He builds the temple. He's establishing the kingdom. Solomon messes up, but God honors his promise to David. And then we know that further down, if we go into the New Testament, which is really what the Sunday school lesson is trying to do, we find that through the line of David, Jesus comes. And so we're in Unit 2, Jesus and the Davidic Covenant. That's what the lesson is trying to show us, that God made this promise, but this promise was a promise for the immediate future, and it was a promise for the long-term future. So God is building a house for David, who wants to build a house. And so our Sunday school lesson, it says in the lesson aim, recognize the significance of making a major part of planning an inheritance for our descendants. Making God a major part. So we think we have a plan, but God needs to be the center and the focus of that plan. His will is what we should be working towards. And so just like if we're comparing David and Saul, Saul was following the will of the people. God wants us to follow his will and do what he wants. And he establishes in his response to David and Nathan that he never said in his will to any of the people that he wanted them to build him a house. And so what is it that he said? Well, I said to feed my people. That's what you should be working towards. I pulled you from the sheep. I made you ruler, set you before my people. Do that. And I will take care of the house building and the establishing and the protection. And so we just have to remember that whatever it is that we're working on, what's in the best interest of our descendants and those that we are bringing into the body is to follow after the will of God. And if we do that, then we will be prosperous and be blessed, and they will be blessed through our witness. Next, feel the need to keep trusting God even when he denies our requests. So I said earlier that we have ambitions, right? And our ambitions seem good, but everything in your heart to do is not of God. And just like I used the example when Samuel went to Jesse's children and he said, stop looking at their faces. I judge the heart. God knows what's in our heart to do, but he also knows his will. And from the beginning, he's been working that one plan. And so if he ever stops you in your pursuit of an ambition or a goal, know that he is always working his one plan. And that is to be reconciled with his people. And if your ambition, while it may seem good, is not working towards that, he's doing you a favor by stopping you in your tracks. And so we should not be, offended or feel frustrated or allow our pride and our stubbornness to rise up. Again, much like the example that I gave when Samuel talked to Saul, those things are against God. They are not like him. What he wants above all else from us aren't our tangibles and our scapegoats. He wants our submission and our willingness to serve and follow him. And decide to seek God's heart and to be in his presence. And so it sounds so easy, right? Let's just look for God's heart. But we need to spend time in his presence with him, prayer and communing with him. That's what he wants. That's what God wants. When he gave the example to David about how he had traveled with the people, he wanted to dwell among his people. He wants his people to be with him. And that's why I said he's working on that one plan to be reconciled with his people. He wants to be with us. So by submitting to his will, following after him, serving him, learning of him, we can know his heart. I think we talked about this 2 lessons ago, maybe. We can learn his heart and what his will is for our life because he wants to tell you. He's not trying to be hidden. I think I've said that before. So we have to make time to learn and to study and to know him. So I think I covered everything that I wanted to say. I don't know if I will be back on next week for the Sunday school lesson, but if I'm not, then I will definitely see you the week after. Thank you so much for joining me. And for those of you who have liked, I did have a question in here. And if you have time, just pop a little answer. And so when God gave the commandment to his people to feed, to his leaders to feed my people, what does it mean to feed his people? And, if you have an answer for that or an example for that, just go ahead and drop it in the comments. So I will talk to you all later. Thank you so much for joining me. Be blessed. And we will see you again in a week or two for Sunday school. Bye-bye.